Can you stay for a few minutes?
Sure.
Gary Webb is on the line from San Jose, and if you want to stay and talk about this article, I need some help here.
Right.
Gary Webb, are you there this morning?
Yeah, I am.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
How are you?
Very tired. Early out here.
I apologize. You're really nice to do this. We've had so many calls about this, is why we asked you to do it.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it.
I actually heard you on a radio station when I was in Detroit a couple weeks ago for about an hour talking about this. This is what it's all about. It's the San Jose Mercury News, and here's a front page piece in August the 18th, and it's the first of a three-part series. Tell us, you know, in a couple minutes, what this is about.
It's about a drug ring that operated in San Francisco and Los Angeles in the mid-'80s, and it was connected to a Nicaraguan anti-communist army called the FDN, which was one of the biggest groups that we know as the Contras. And it was selling cocaine in Los Angeles for the most part, but in other areas of the country as well, to the gangs, to the Crips and Bloods down in South Central Los Angeles. And they were taking the money and using some of it, I don't know how much, we haven't figured that out yet, to buy weapons for the Contras. And you know, I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds like the wildest conspiracy theories, which is why all our supporting documentation for the thing is posted on the internet. If anybody's interested, I can give you the internet address a little later on.
Yeah, we've got from the Mercury News here a big chart that you put together from the Sunday story. Did you write all this, by the way?
Yes, I did.
This is a chart that shows how the money left down around Colombia. And can you give us a little bit of this scenario on how these
I'm not looking at a television right now, but is that the pipeline chart?
It is.
Yeah. Those were the various smuggling routes that the ring used starting in the late 70s up to the early 90s to get the cocaine into the country and to get some of the money back out of the country. And it depending on the year and depending on the how intense the police scrutiny was, which wasn't very for the most part. Those are the different routes they used. They used freighters. They used stolen cars. They would just fly the stuff in suitcases early on when you didn't bring very much in.
Let me read the first one up here, which is right near Los Angeles. It says, mid-1970s, luxury cars stolen in California were driven to Nicaragua, where they were officially imported by the Nicaraguan military to avoid stiff excise taxes and sold to wealthy Managuans.
Right.
The second number, which is way down here in Peru, it says mid-late 1970s, Peruvian cocaine was smuggled to Panama, secreted in suitcases and shoes with false bottoms and carried into the U.S. by airline passengers. Points of entry included San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, and New Orleans. The third one is late 1970s to 83. Cocaine from the new Cali cartel in Colombia was loaded onto freighters owned by the Gran Colombian Line. The freighters were offloaded in the ports of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. 4. Early 1980s, cocaine was flown from Colombia to the Bahamas, where it was loaded aboard small planes and flown into Miami. From there, couriers would take it to California aboard commercial airliners.
Right.
Now, I can go on about this, but where did you get the new information?
You know, it's been public record for 20 years almost. It was just from court files. I mean, eventually, once in a while, they would catch one of these people. The DEA would file an affidavit and lay out what they knew about the drug ring's operations, and it came from, a lot of stuff in National Archives mostly. A lot of these old court cases, and then there were cases in Nicaragua which laid out the smuggling routes through that country into the United States, so we had the back end of it as well.
Gary Webb, Jack Nelson is at the table. I do want to tell the audience something, because right over your head, you can't see that. Look up on that screen there when we have it. It looks like there's a crack in the window, but that's actually condensation on our window back here because it's so muggy, and it comes right down Jack's head, so I wanted to let
you wouldn't believe how muggy it can get here in Washington.
Oh, yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Jack Nelson asked a question.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you, because I haven't read the series. It looks fantastic, but what about the CIA involvement in all of this? Is that...
Well, that part of the story deals with the FDN, that guerrilla army that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
That was, as the Iran-Contra hearings documented pretty well, that was a creation of the CIA.
Right.
And we tracked the cocaine dealers who were running this operation all the way up the ladder to the couple of CIA agents that were actually running the FDN, Enrique Bermudez and Adolfo Calero. And let me tell you, as a bit of background, most of this information, or much of the information, came out at a trial in San Diego in March. One of the cocaine brokers, the guy named Danilo Blandone, who was the head of the Southern California operation, has been working for the U.S. government for the last couple of years, and he was the star witness in a cocaine trafficking trial for the DEA in San Diego, and a lot of this stuff came out under cross-examination when he was up on the witness stand because the defense was curious, to say the least, about his relationship with the Contras and the Crips, and unfortunately they couldn't really get into a lot of it because before the trial the United States filed a motion asking that nobody be allowed to ask Mr. Blandone about his relationship with the CIA, and it was one of the most curious documents I'd ever seen. It said, if true, this matter would be classified, and if false, it shouldn't be allowed at the trial. So
did you get
really got a chance to quiz him in great detail about his relationship there.
Did you get any help at all out of the CIA?
During the investigation? Absolutely not. They wouldn't even return my phone calls. I mean, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for information on Blandone and his boss, Norman Meneses, and I was told that they can't tell me anything because it's a matter of national security.
Gary Webb, where are you from originally?
My dad was in the Marines, so I'm from everywhere.
And how long have you been with the San Jose Mercury News?
I've been with the Mercury 8 years. I was with the Cleveland Plain Dealer 5 years before that.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to college in Indiana for a year, and then I went to college in Kentucky.
We're at Indiana University?
Yeah, IU in Indianapolis, at community college, and I had a scholarship there, and then my dad got transferred, and I ended up at Northern Kentucky University.
We're going to take a call in a moment, but in your stories also you say that the Crips and the Bloods, the gangs in L.A. get involved in this. How?
That's the back end of the deal. That's who was buying the cocaine, and they were buying cocaine and they were buying weapons from these fellows.
How much? Can you give us some sense of how big this thing is?
Well, one of the guys that talked to me was the guy who was buying it, a fellow named Freeway Rick Ross. He was the biggest crack wholesaler in Los Angeles during the 1980s. And he says, well, he and Danilo Blandone have both said that, at their peak they were doing 100 kilos a week. And that's just with one dealer. I don't know how much Blandone was selling to other people, but with Rick Ross, he was selling at least 100 kilos a week by 1984, 1985.
Let's take a call, and Jack Nelson's here at the desk with us, and we'll ask both of you gentlemen to get involved. Wilmington, Delaware, go ahead, please.
Good morning. I'm a little nervous because this is my first time.
That's all right.
Join the club.
But if you will remember, during the CIA Contra hearings, when Ollie North and President Reagan and all those other people were having this war in Nicaragua, this information came out then, but it was just put under the rug. But it was a well-known fact at the time that the CIA was using gangs in California and various parts of the country, black groups, and they would bring drugs into the United States, and they are part of the reason why the drug situation is the way it is today, because they infiltrated the country with all these drugs so that they could get the money, because Congress would not appropriate money for us to carry on that war in Nicaragua. So they had to get money from someplace to finance the war.
But what about right now, though? What do you think the situation is? I ask all of you, what's the status of this kind of drug running today? Gary Webb?
Well, I don't know what the situation is now, but the CIA is one of the reasons why the situation is what it is today.
All right, thanks, caller. Mr. Webb, what do you say about today?
Whether this liaison exists today?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I found these guys were buying and selling from the same sources up until 1992 when Blandone was finally arrested by the DEA. So, I mean, it was going on at least until 92.
What do you think?
My guess is not. I mean, I can't believe, for example, that Judge William Webster, who I've known for a long time, who was CIA director, would not have tried to put a stop to anything like that when he was CIA director, and that Mr. Deutsch, the current CIA director, I can't believe that he would put up with something like that.
I'm not saying that the CIA is necessarily involved in.
No, I know you're not. I know you're not saying that. Yeah, but I'm just saying I don't think so. That was an answer to Brian's question. I know you didn't say that, Gary.
Well, in some later items here on your pipeline chart, it says in the late 1980s, Colombian cocaine was flown aboard private planes into small airfields in northern Costa Rica and southern Nicaragua. Super DC-3s leaving from San Jose, Costa Rica, loaded with general merchandise would touch down briefly, take on a cocaine load, and continue on to U.S. airports. Spring.
Right. That came out of the trial down in Nicaragua. Norwin Meneses, the guy who was running this drug ring.
Thanks. Springfield, Missouri, you're next.
Yeah, Brian, I'm really disappointed in you. I really am. The whole theme of this is that the CIA was bringing or was supplying the Contras with guns and financing it off of drugs. That's the theme, and the only source we have for this is some questionable character. This is like the Gary Sick thing all over. And
let me. Have you read the series?
No, I have
well,
not.
That's not the only source. That's the only source we've talked about.
That's the only source you've talked about.
Right. We had like 7 or 8 independent sources on this stuff, and contemporaneous.
Yeah, but you haven't provided any names.
Pardon?
No names.
Well, where do you want me to start?
Well, start.
You've got Sergeant Tom Gordon, who filed an affidavit in Los Angeles in 1986.
Was I correct on the theme of this whole thing that the CIA was supplying the Contras with guns and financing the whole thing off of drugs?
No, that's not correct. Well, they were certainly supplying with guns. They weren't financing the whole thing off of drugs. They were financing part of it off of drugs.
Part of it. Well, part's even bad, but...
Well, I tend to agree.
But I don't know. I'm disappointed in Brian. He puts experts on for scandals he hadn't put any experts that know about scandals for Clinton. But yet he puts on these stupid '80s scandals. Still, I mean, he's back in the past.
Caller, hold on just a second.
Well, I tell you, I don't
Gary
think
Webb,
that community in Los Angeles thinks it's a stupid scandal.
Let me just tell the caller why this gentleman's on here. It's because caller after caller kept calling up and referring to this whole subject. It seems the first thing you do is you go to the source and ask what it's all about. And then we can continue talking about this. I don't blame you for being upset. We can't deal with this thing in 15 minutes. That's
from the White House to put this.
Now there's one. There's one of your calls.
Democrat Republican.
Caller, there's not even this. We haven't talked to the White House forever in this whole thing.
Well, who did you bowed to somebody's pressure?
We didn't bow to anybody's pressure.
Let the calls come as they come.
We did. Oh, he's upset about the calls.
No, the Democrat Republican. Why don't you just let the calls? You say that the callers.
This guy's got a political agenda.
Program.
I don't care if he's got a political agenda, but he's upset because we split the call lines. Gary Webb, you want to talk some more about your sources on this thing, and who will not talk? Who just absolutely won't talk?
We filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the CIA, and as I said, those were denied on national security grounds. We filed them with the DEA, and for the first time in my life, I think, the DEA came out and said, no, we don't want to give you any records because we're concerned about invading the privacy of these drug dealers, so we don't want to tell you about them. So they didn't give us anything. The FBI sent me a letter saying it might be 2 years before they got around to answering my request. The INS has never responded. The State Department has gotten the stuff and never responded. I mean, these have been filed for like 6-8 months. And then we tried asking the DEA questions, and we couldn't get any answer from them. The only thing the CIA says is it's ludicrous, which, I'll be the first to agree. The idea of them selling drugs to the Contras, for the Contras and the Crips is ludicrous, but everything we saw said it was true.
Let's grab a call from Dayton, Ohio. Go ahead, please.
Hi. The one question that no one's asked yet, and I'm going to ask it and see if this guy gives us an honest answer. Were these drugs targeted to black people?
I don't think they were targeted like in the manner that you mean. They were targeted insofar as, Danilo Blandón, the man who was sent to Los Angeles to sell these drugs, he had a master's degree in marketing. That was his job before the revolution. He was in charge of setting up wholesale markets for Nicaraguan agricultural produce. He came to the United States and testified. And he isn't the only one that says this, but he said this under oath while a government witness. He wasn't trying to beat a rap. He wasn't trying to reduce a sentence. He's a free man. And he came into court and testified to this under oath. And what he said was that he was schooled in San Francisco in this drug trade. It took him 2 days to teach him how to become a cocaine dealer. He went down to Los Angeles and didn't know what to do. And when you talk to his friends and you look at the documents that exist, what happened apparently was, the guy's a marketing expert. He looked around, he saw where it wasn't being sold, and went to sell it there. I mean, I think it was as simple as that, and I don't think anybody really cared particularly where he got the money as long as he got it.
We're going to get time for at least one more call, but I want to ask you, because the caller who was upset about this being set up by the White House, let me bring in the Mena, Arkansas story that the Wall Street Journal spent a lot of time on.
Well, we wrote about that the other day.
How does that fit in with all this? I mean,
Mena was a parallel. Mena was part of a parallel operation that was going on the East Coast, which is why if people think they've heard about this before, it's because they heard about the East Coast pipeline when it was uncovered back in '85 and '86.
But I want to make the connection with the current president. He was supposedly involved as a governor?
Well, he was governor while this was going on. Whether or not he knew about it is something I don't think has been proven yet.
Let me ask Jack Nelson about this. Do you pay attention to that Mena, Arkansas story?
Well, we've written what was there, but I mean, there's no indication that Clinton as governor had anything to do with it. I mean, it's been written about with all sorts of speculation by a lot of right-wing publications, but I've never seen anything that indicated any complicity on the part of the president.
Gary Webb, if people want to get a copy of this, I understand that you have reprints for a small fee.
I think actually they decided to make it free, but you can call 408-920-5999, or you can download the whole thing from the internet with all our documentation, with sound clips so you can hear Danilo Blandón testifying to this in his own words. And you can get that at www.sjmercury.com/drugs. That's the best version, actually.
All right, let's do that one again so that people can write it down.
www.sjmercury.com/drugs.
And if, again, that telephone number, if you want to, and I assume there's no one there now.
Well, there might be a machine there now. You can leave a name and number.
408-920-5999. Are you alleging in any of this that the Republicans had anything to do with this as a party?
No, I mean, I tried to stay as far out of partisan politics on this story as I could, and just tell a story about a drug operation. You know, we mentioned obviously that Reagan was in power when he authorized this secret war down there, but you know, Clinton's in power now, and those are the folks who put Danilo Blandón on the federal payroll. I mean, the guy that brought crack to L.A. is now a federal government employee.
All right, Virginia Beach, Virginia, go ahead, please.
Yes, concerning the Arkansas involvement in the drug thing, ever since 1986, Bill Clinton as governor did not ride herd on this thing. But all the drugs came through Mena, Arkansas. Everybody knows that and reads it in the papers. Barry Seal was doing it. Barry Seal was killed. Clinton didn't really have anything to do with it except he knew about it, gave auspice to it, rode herd on it, and his government bond program received 10% of the profits, plus all the money was able to be laundered through Arkansas banks.
All right, thanks. Mr. Webb.
That's a lot of the allegations around Mena, and a lot of what she said is true. That Barry Seal was, I mean, he was one of the biggest drug dealers in the country at the time, and that's where he was based out of.
Mr. Nelson, Freedom of Information Act, has it made any difference?
Yes, in some cases it has. I mean, we've been able to get files from the FBI in some cases. I did, for the book, I got a lot of my information that I did on Terror in the Night, Klan's campaign against the Jews.
What about that, Mr. Webb?
The one we had that worked, which, I mean, sort of cemented the story for us, was the Freedom of Information Act that we filed with the National Archives. And those folks over there released some FBI documents that had been classified for about 10 years regarding this drug ring and regarding this operation, and we got them out of the files of Iran-Contra Special Prosecutor Lawrence Walsh. I mean, these are some of the FBI reports that were done either prior to the Walsh investigation as part of something else or as part of the Walsh investigation.
Let's go to Newport, Rhode Island next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webb, this is a very interesting conversation. You should also check at the National Archives the recently released documents on the Board of Economic Warfare from World War II, which was founded by William Casey, who worked, who was a part of the old OSS.
Yeah.
And they began by purchasing the first crop of opium that they purchased. The entire crop from Turkey was 1943. Lucky Luciano was deported to Naples after he helped with the invasion of Sicily. Luciano began his heroin trafficking from Turkey through Naples, Sicily, and
Cuba. This is all in those files?
Yeah, no, the preemptive buys, what the Board of Economic Warfare was about. The reason why I'm interested in it is some characters in your part of the country were on the Board of Economic Warfare at that, okay? And
right.
So, and anyway, so it's been going on for a long, long time. And and then, of course, it's a logical thing that Casey would be involved in this type of operation in the 1980s.
Thanks, Mr.
Well, it sounds like Gary's got himself another story there.
I got.
Or if somebody doesn't, I was going to say if somebody doesn't beat you to it, Gary. But it did sound interesting what she said.
Now,
this isn't the best way to get a story.
Right.
Well, you know, when you sit and listen to everybody on this thing, you start to hear all the conspiracy theories.
Well,
have they come to you in a big way? I mean, you find people coming out of the woodwork because they follow these kind of things.
Yeah. That's sort of one of the risks of doing this kind of story. And frankly, I mean, the thing that gave us the sort of intestinal fortitude to do this, because we realize this is a very controversial story. This is like almost impossible to believe when you look at it. But we've got this tool now called the World Wide Web, where you can show people the documents you used. I mean, you can click on you can read the story, and if it says set a report, you can click on the word report and actually read the report. If we've got a quote in there and it's highlighted, you can hear it and actually read the report. If we've got a quote in there and it's highlighted, you can hear what these folks said. So, make up your own minds. Don't take my word for it. Nobody knows who I am.
You know, when I was listening to that radio station, I don't even remember which radio station, and don't mention it, please, because I'm going to say something that they won't like. You were set up before you got on in a way you probably didn't even know about.
You're probably right.
And I just wondered how often. I mean, the fellow that was the host had an agenda. He talked about you in a specific way, and by the time you got on, I was listening thinking, I wonder if Mr. Webb has any idea what he's been saying before you got on the air.
No, I have none. Tell me about it.
Well, I can't hear on the air because I don't remember the name, I don't remember the station, and I don't want to say anything that would be, I can't remember.
But what he did was sandbag him, is that right?
Well, not necessarily, because he was very much in favor of what he had done.
So
it was but it was in a certain way that he set it up, and you got the distinct impression he was just overwhelmingly delighted that you had done this, and for a lot of political reasons that he was talking about. Let's take one more call for you, and then we'll let you go. Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Morning.
Hey, it's a thrill to get through to you guys. I've had the TV turned down so long I probably lost track of the conversation. Your screener said turn the set down. One of the things that had caught my interest when you first brought the gentleman on about the investigation of the CIA involvement in the drug trafficking in Los Angeles was when you showed his chart, which I understand he couldn't see at the time. It showed all the different points where the drugs had entered the country, and I couldn't read the chart well enough to know if the area down there around the Gulf included Mena, Arkansas or not. This Mena, Arkansas thing has been going on. That accusation's been made now ever since Clinton came into office, especially tying him and Don Lassiter and the other gentleman that was supposedly the head man in that part of the country. So we've all tie together.
We've talked about it, and I'll let Mr. Webb answer you. Go ahead.
Actually, to give you a bit of background, I mean, Mena just became an issue since Clinton became president, but the information has been available since the Kerry Committee did its investigation back in '87 and '88. A lot of what I know about Mena came from reading the report, reading the report of that investigation. As I said, they were on to this East Coast Contra pipeline, which they exposed pretty well. For some reason, that report just never had any resonance with the media.
What's your follow-up on all this?
Obviously now, with things going on, Deutsch has asked for an investigation from the CIA Inspector General. That's one thing we're looking at. There is a lot of talk, especially among the Congressional Black Caucus, about doing hearings on this thing, which is another issue. And then you get the role of the DEA and the Justice Department in this thing, and Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein have both asked for investigations on that. So there's a number of investigations going on in Washington that we're going to be following.
Gary Webb, 5 a.m. out there. Thanks a lot for getting up and telling us about this.
Sure, glad to be here.
And as we'll give out the telephone number one more time if you want to get the documents, 408-920-5999. in your life as a journalist, what articles have you written that got the most impact? I mean, where, you know, he's talking about hearings happening and all this kind of stuff, CIA director getting involved.
Well, I guess the most impact I had was a series I did on mental institution, the largest mental institution in the world in Milledgeville, Georgia, which had 12,500 patients and 2,500 more on an outpatient basis. And I did a series of stories that showed that the chief surgeon there was away from the hospital at times while a nurse who was his close friend was performing major surgery on patients, where another doctor was giving experimental drugs to mental patients, where they only spent $2.52 a day for the care, feeding, and housing of each mental patient. I mean, it was a snake pit, and there was a big investigation later, and they fired a bunch of people, including the superintendent of the hospital, and had a big mental health reform there. So that probably was the most.
Thanks for staying later.
Yeah. I'm glad I got here on time.
We got an hour and 5 minutes out of you. Thank you very much, Jack Nelson, who is the chief Washington correspondent for the LA Times, and Charlie Peters and Ken Tomlinson up next after a short break.